Welcome to Studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we've discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
Michael Totaro,
and Ted Broussard.
And today we're going to tackle one of those mysterious topics that people love to wax poetic about. As a matter of fact, I have a quote here from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. In his first poem, The Burnt Norton, he says this: "Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable." And in this sort of way, we get these interesting meditations and thoughts about what time is, but we can also go into the science of time and the theology of time, which we have our Summa Theologia here today to help us with.
Well, I think it's important for us to recognize, first of all, that the church and science agree on this first thing, that time did not come into existence until the Big Bang or the beginning of the universe. And so that shows a distinction between eternity, where God resides, and time that we exist in. And of course God lives in time also. He's everywhere. He's ever present, omnipresent.
Yeah, exactly. And it reminds me of I'm pretty certain that I'm not the first person who sort of asked this question, especially when I was a child. But yeah, I used to ask quite often, and I would even ask my parents, like, hey, what did God do before creation? And it was some years later I came across, I don't even remember which, what the title of the book was, but it was something pertaining to Catholic theology, and I want to say it may have been Peter Kreeft, but essentially, the point was to ask the question, what did God do before time, is actually an undefined question, because to suggest that there was time before time, that's a contradiction, And so it's one of those things that, at least for me, can be a little bit sort of mind-bending. But, Ted, what you mentioned a moment ago in this, we're all, I think, quite aware of the purported conflicts or supposed conflict between science and faith. And certainly from the perspective and teachings of the Catholic Church, there really is no conflict whatsoever.
No, that's true.
So just to jump into a little bit of what St. Thomas describes in his question on the eternity of God, which is kind of what we're getting at. What is this? What is time? What is eternity? Basically, to kind of summarize what he's saying, he says, "Now in a thing bereft of movement, which is always the same, there is no before or after. And as therefore the idea of time consists in numbering of before and after in movement, so likewise in the apprehension of the uniformity of what is outside of movement, which is God, consists the idea of eternity." And I think that's one thing we need to establish, that time is a function of change and movement. And you were mentioning that, and I think St. Thomas really, in his 5 proofs of God, this is his first proof, right? God is the unmovable mover. And some people have tried to avoid this. They have tried to avoid the idea that there was a beginning of the universe, that there was a beginning to all time, because if they can avoid that, they can dodge that there's a creator, right? But we found over and over again, Ted, you mentioned the Big Bang theory. This was a theory presented, 1927, I believe.
I think so.
Father Lemaitre was I think he had a PhD in cosmology and from MIT, and he presented his theory on this because he was actually looking at something which it was beyond me. It has to do with the recession of light and in dealing with the planets. But at any rate, what his studies did was show that while we're trying to think of filling up space, what's actually happening is space is filling up everything with time and space itself, right?
Mhm.
It's not that we have this huge universe and we're slowly filling that space in with stuff. It's that time and space are growing, and as you go farther out, it moves faster. And he came up with all these ideas, and was a colleague of Einstein who said, okay, the math works out on that. The farther away, the faster. However, it just doesn't make sense, this time-space creation thing. And then we've had several experiments since then that have proven this theory, right?
Yes, yes. And an interesting anecdote about the Big Bang, Father Lemaitre did not use that term. That term was presented by another astronomer and an atheist, Sir Fred Hoyle. He coined the phrase Big Bang, and it was a tongue-in-cheek reference because he recognized that the Big Bang indicated there was a beginning of the universe, and that as Christians we would say, you see, there it's in Genesis, right?
Right.
And as it turns out, again, Sir Fred Hoyle was an atheist, and he didn't come into Christianity with the Big Bang, but he did convert, as I understand it. And it had to do with the fine-tuning of the universe, which is something maybe we'll get into at some point. But it's just an interesting anecdote that he did, through science, he came to believe that there was a creator.
Yeah, and that you bring that up in terms of the that moment of creation, which now again we refer to, at least from a science point of view, the Big Bang. I'd like to just quote a passage from St. Thomas Aquinas's Summa Contra Gentiles, and basically he writes, "And so it is that Holy Scripture proclaims the creation of things to have been effected in an indivisible instant. For it is written, quote, 'In the beginning God created heaven and earth,' end quote." That's from Genesis, of course. And St. Basil explains that this beginning is, quote, "the beginning of time," end quote, and is necessarily indivisible, as Aristotle proves in his Physics number 6.
So one of the proofs that came up after Einstein basically told Lemaitre the physics I can't grasp this, movement, was the Hubble. That Hubble was studying the red shift, right? And he did the calculations and said, why? Well, if you put in this constant, then indeed we would have this beginning, and it would be moving at the appropriate speed. And so this was one of the other confirmations. We have that equation by Hubble for including the constant, which that's a whole nother proof in and of itself. We'll get to hopefully too, but I might as well jump in there. There are what, 20 constants? Is that approximately?
I think it may be 27, but
okay.
I don't have a good handle on how many there are.
A lot of numbers that have to be perfect, held in perfection. These numbers had to happen immediately at the Big Bang and continue until now. And basically the idea is one sliver, 0.0000, not infinite. Okay, we won't get there, but some tiny sliver of a difference in any of those constants, and we wouldn't exist.
That's right. There would be no life. And in some cases, depending on how you calculate those constants, star formation would not have happened. Therefore, no galaxies, no light.
Right.
There would have been no hydrogen.
Right.
Hydrogen is the fuel that stars use.
So these are amazing discoveries that I think I'd like to refer everyone to the magicenter.com website. Father Spitzer gives some amazing talks on these proofs of God's existence. I would say the evidence from science and physics that show or point to the existence of God. And that's some of the things we've been talking about. Just unbelievable. Also, he gives some very positive outlooks on the future of scientists, because as we discover these things, and this is so rich right now, a lot of the younger scientists are leaving their atheistic, I guess, beliefs behind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, Father Spitzer, in one of his videos, points out that about 66% of young scientists declare themselves to be believers. They're, I'm not sure if they're Christian necessarily, but they believe that there is a creator.
So we have to get around this again, right? So scientists had to come up with something else. What can we do to not have this beginning? Because it seems so clear that if we were looking at the Big Bang Theory, if we're looking at Hubble's constant and all these things that, and by the way, entropy, we haven't entered that area yet, but this idea of entropy being disorder, which if it was all random, it would be incredible disorder, right?
Yes.
But we have very little entropy and a lot of order, and that, again, implies a creator. So back to the need to have a new way of thinking, basically, a new way to get rid of a beginning. In comes the multiverse, right? So this way we have I think scientists are trying to find a loophole somewhere instead of trying to find the truth, right?
Absolutely.
So now, but Father Spitzer explains that even if there's a multiverse, no matter what, there had to have been a beginning. And he gives, if you want, I so recommend going there, but he gives the proof of, I believe I'm trying to think of the name of the three scientists that got together. I think it's PVG, or BVG? Yes, I think it's the BVG proof. I'm going to try to find the names of the scientists, but they were the ones that basically prove that even if there's a multiverse, there still had to be a beginning. So
yeah, this topic, of course, has so much science involved. I'm not a physicist myself. However, I am a member of a national organization, the Society for Catholic Scientists, and very impressive when I look at the roster. You've got theoretical physicists, biologists, the whole gamut, and it's so for anyone out there and our among our listeners who think that perhaps there's just a small kind of handful of scientists who also are believers, it is not the case, and because it's, as we've been talking about in this segment, just using sheer just reason, okay, to draw a conclusion such that it completely removes the possibility of God. And by the way, even more recently, and again, I can't speak too much in detail because again, I'm not a physicist, but Dr. Lawrence Krauss most recently, basically, in some book that he wrote, indicates that actually we don't have to worry about speaking about a creation or a beginning. The universe has just always existed, and which, with all due respect to Professor Krauss, that just seems to be completely unreasonable.
Well, especially in light of the Big Bang, right? The Big Bang was the thing that science discovered that showed that there was a beginning to the universe. Now, some of the audience may be aware of the new information coming out since the James Webb Telescope was launched, and that was about 2 years ago. It seems like weekly, if not daily, there's new information, and it's because the James Webb is not looking at the universe using visible light. It's using infrared, invisible to us as humans. And they're looking further back at further distances and finding some astounding things. I want to inject this right now, though, because what you hear a lot of is that it appears that cosmology will have to be rewritten based on the James Webb. And as a result of that, there's been this word going around that the Big Bang is dead. And I was curious about that. It turns out that that notion was posited by someone named Eric J. Lerner. He's an American popular science writer and a plasma researcher. He wrote a book in 1991 titled The Big Bang Never Happened. When this news of the James Webb came out, he took advantage of that and said, you see, the Big Bang didn't happen. But the scientist that actually made that comment was talking about the formation of stars and galaxies, not the Big Bang. So the Big Bang is still a relevant part of our understanding of the universe.
You're listening to Catholic Radio for Acadiana at 90.5 FM and 99.5 FM and 12:30 a.m. We are your lay Dominicans, your Third Order Dominicans here, based in Lafayette, Louisiana, out of Our Lady of Wisdom Church. We are the St. Albert the Great chapter, and we're excited to be with you every Thursday at 4 p.m. And we want to thank Stein Lumber for their sponsorship. You can visit Stein Lumber with locations throughout all of Acadiana. And so today we're talking about time and eternity. Of course, what is time? Time is nothing but a measurement of movement, I guess, is what St. Thomas likes to say as well. And we're talking about science. And, I think in our society, in our culture today, we think that, if a scientist says something, then that's the end of it. Well, I think we need to keep in mind that science is provisional. I mean, it needs to continue. It's never an end fact. It's something that continues on. And I think, this is why, we want to talk about time and eternity today with you, because there's new discoveries that's happening every day in the scientific community. And I think we believe that, as we've been speaking, that the more and more science that we see and that's revealed to us, the closer and closer we get to God.
So if you have people that you know that are interested in science and you think that it might lead them astray, I would so recommend going, again, to the Magis Center and listening to Father Spitzer's talk on God and evolution and creation, because, specifically creation, he does a video on, and it is, he literally walks you through all of the proofs and also explains some of the basics, which maybe we should also back up and do a little bit. And I did, Mike, you had mentioned being part of the Society for Catholic Scientists, mm-hmm. And I just wanted to let people know that that I'm not a scientist.
Neither am I.
No, we are geeks with crosses. That's what Charles, one of our members, says. We're just geeks with crosses, Dominican crosses that we wear. And so we love talking about this and thinking about these things. And as my mom said, it's a good thing somebody does. But
I think we should mention here the name of the chapter is St. Albert the Great.
Yes.
Who is the father of science.
Right.
And I should add here that when science began, the notion was that God had created everything. And that's how observations were done. And the notion was that you could come to know God through his creation. And now that, by and large, has been rejected by science, and it appears that what they are doing is they are intentionally looking for theories that eliminate God from the picture. The multiverse is a good example of it, I believe. Mm-hmm. The multiverse is based on the fine-tuning of the universe, as I understand it, Mike.
I honestly,
comment on that?
So that's really sort of beyond my realm of understanding and knowledge. But
well, I'm going to look at what look. It almost seems like St. Thomas prepared for the multiverse commentary. There's a question, question 7 of Prima Pars in the Summa Theologiae, where St. Thomas is talking about the infinity of God. And Article 4 asks whether an infinite multitude can exist. Can you believe it? So he says, likewise, a multitude in nature is created, and everything created is comprehended under some clear intention of the Creator. for no agent acts aimlessly. And I just feel like that addresses some of the, before we even know the science behind it, before we know these proofs that have come that show that there's no way that, okay, so I believe the number, can you tell me the name of the scientist who did it? He does a number that gives the exponential amount of chance that we could have all these constants, have all this stuff happening, and not have a creator, not have intelligent design. The chance of this randomly happening, which is, I know what the number is, it's 10 to the 10 to the 123. Basically, Father Spitzer says that if you write out all those zeros, you could not, in 10-point type, you couldn't fit that in our solar system, that number. That's the chance. And he said, basically, that's the chance of putting a monkey in front of a typewriter and leaving him there, and then coming back and seeing that he wrote Shakespeare's Hamlet.
Exactly.
Right? And
Yes,
that is just, I don't know. And I think so, St. Thomas, I just love that he even addresses the multitude of existence. And we've come to the point where science has concurred. I believe that there's a quote somewhere, and I'm gonna probably botch it up, but basically it's talking about scientists climbing this mountain of information and creation, and they get to the top, and the theologians are there to greet them.
Robert Jastrow.
There you go.
That's right.
I knew you'd know that one, Ted.
Well, that sort of reminds me of, so we're, here we are in 2024, and we're having this discussion, but I want to point to a meeting that took place in 1951, meeting of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. So at that time, the Holy Father was Pope Pius XII, and there's basically a document of his presentation or his talk, and he says as follows: in fact, according to the measure of its progress, its being science, and contrary to affirmations advanced in the past, true science discovers God in an ever-increasing degree, as though God were waiting behind every door opened by science. We would even say that from this progressive discovery of God, which is realized in the increase of knowledge, there flow benefits not only for the scientist himself when he reflects as a philosopher, and how can he escape such reflection, but also for those who share in these new discoveries or make them the object of their own considerations.
So going back to waxing poetic a little bit about time, we'll move back into T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. His third movement, East Coker, he begins with, "In my beginning is my end," and he finishes that poem, "In my end is my beginning." And actually on Godsplaining, you can go hear the Dominican priest talk about T.S. Eliot's poem, and it's just a fascinating poem about time. But right here, Mike, we were talking about this concept of our beginning and our end. Can you explain a little more about that?
Sure. So I think that, the real sort of challenge for us as created beings, created humans, right, is that we exist in time, in space, and our experiences, especially with regard to time, which, as we've already mentioned, is merely sort of a measure of change and movement, motion. And so from our point of view, we think of, we can reflect upon the past, we experience the present, and at best we can sort of imagine or envision what the future might be, but we do not know what it will be. And so in that sense, from our limited, finite sort of existence, we are sort of like a musical piece, a piece of music. So it's linear. It has the first note, and then subsequent notes and chords, and then there's a final note or final chord. But it's all linear. We experience the song in a linear, successive way. God, on the other hand, because God is eternal, he exists outside of time, then he can see what we call our past, present, and future, but he sees all of it in one eternal present. So it's sort of like the analogy might be, he sees what we see as this kind of linear unfolding of music. He sees a painting. Because when we go into a museum and we look at a very nice, beautiful painting, we see it, boom, there it is. It's all there. That is, in a way, how God sees what we call past, present, and future.
Beautiful analogy. I love it. It's so simple, and it's just a wonderful way to express something that is really beyond our understanding, but we can kind of get a glimpse of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that we can also go to one of the major theologies in our church. It begins in the Gospel of St. John. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was God. The Word was with God. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
But the idea is that there's this interesting moment in time where our Lord and Creator becomes incarnate and intersects in time. And actually, when I was doing my little notes for this, preparing and praying, and I wrote infinity and eternity, and they intersected, at the cross. And it just made me start meditating on some concepts where we, when we're in Mass, in the sacrifice of the Mass, we are said to be present at the actual time of Calvary. Almost, and if you can all just be geeky with me for a minute, the space-time continuum, the idea of this warping of this massive impact warps time, right? It seems like it's possible even to explain this in science eventually when we get that far.
Yes. So the church teaches that when we are present at Holy Mass, first, let's back up for a moment and remind ourselves that at this moment, Mass is being celebrated in several places around the world. And at every moment and every day, Mass is being celebrated somewhere around the world. Yeah. And so there is this sort of continuum and continual sort of ever-present in a way that, and it's not just a figurative kind of thing or symbolic thing. As you mentioned just moments ago, Cheryl, we are at Holy Mass, we are at Calvary. The altar is Calvary. And it's not just a representation of that, but in some way, in some mystical and divine way that certainly I can't understand, but I think that the church teaches that it's really, we really just can't wrap our minds around it, but it is a tenet of faith that we are present at that moment in time, okay, where time actually sort of converges. What we call past, present, and future, it all converges at that precise moment when it's all just this kind of singularity in a sort of way.
And I might add that there's something in Scripture about, I've forgotten if it's the sacrifice is going to be celebrated from the rising of the sun to its setting. I forget exactly the language. And if you think about it, you think about all the time zones around the world. There is a Mass going on probably at every hour of every day, 365 days a year. It's a constant thing that's been happening since the early part of the church.
So this has been really interesting to me, and so hopefully all the geeks out there are also excited about learning a little bit more about how science is proving God. And also, if you've watched the movie Interstellar, you've seen this, that the one thing that happens in Interstellar that I don't know if they intend to is they make the comment that love is the one thing that can cross all dimensions. And what a way to end this, okay? So remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace. God bless.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word, a shotgun blast was the last thing I heard, I rattled in the wind.